Hi, I'm Dan Cortopassi. Welcome to Layout Building. In this episode, I'm going to add Roadbed to our N-scale Siren Creek project layout. Our N-scale Siren Creek layout is designed to be small enough that Nichole and I can take it with us when we travel in our RV. In the last episode, I built the benchwork for the layout. It's designed to fit on top of the dinette table in the RV. It has handholds to make it easier to move around. We plan to store the layout in the camper area above the cab when it's not being used. I've brought the layout into the house to work on it in a more comfortable environment. In this episode, I'm going to put down the roadbed for the track. I should mention that the way I'm putting the roadbed and track down works well if you're sure that you're not going to move the track later. These methods work well, but making changes can be difficult. I'm confident in the track plan that I've developed, so I'm not worried about wanting to change things. I'm going to use some Midwest N-scale Cork roadbed for this layout. I'll glue the roadbed down to the plywood sub-roadbed with carpenter's yellow glue. To help hold things down, I'll also be using some weights, push pins, and a few pieces of scrap wood. Cork is certainly not new, and today there are other options like foam. Cork has good sound deadening qualities and also provides a nice stable surface for hand-laid track. One thing to keep in mind is the cork needs to be relatively fresh. When stored for long periods of time, it can dry out and become brittle, making it next to impossible to bend into a curve. In the last episode, I drew the track centers on the plywood sub-roadbed with a pencil. These are going to be my guides for placing the cork roadbed. A couple of my pencil lines disappeared as I constructed the benchwork. I'll take a few minutes to draw them in again. I bought a box of cork roadbed, which is probably way more than I'll need for this layout. The roadbed comes in strips that are split down the center. Each strip needs to be peeled apart into two pieces. One edge of each piece is beveled. Normally this goes on the outside to simulate a sloping ballast profile. The flat side of the roadbed is in the center. This should be placed on the track center line drawn on the plywood. I'll start with an easy section. The track that runs from the standard gauge engine house and becomes part of the dual gauge main line on the front of the layout is straight. I'll put a bead of yellow glue on the bottom of the roadbed, then flip it over and press it down. I'm being careful to align the flat side of the roadbed with the track center line. I want to do this as accurately as possible so that I'll be able to use the roadbed seams as a reference when laying track. When doing straight sections, sighting down the edge with your eye is a good way to spot any areas that are out of alignment. Once I'm satisfied with the placement, I'll press the roadbed down. I'll put the pieces of scrap wood on top and then put weights on top of that. The scrap wood will help to distribute the weight more evenly across the roadbed. The directions on the glue bottle say it needs to be clamped for a minimum of 30 minutes. I'll set a timer and come back to check it later. Now that the first piece is down, I can add a second. Putting roadbed on curves is a little more challenging since it tends to want to straighten out. Pins can sometimes be useful to hold the roadbed in place temporarily. After a couple of minutes, I can add the scrap wood and weights. I'll remove the pins a few at a time as I go to make room. Sometimes it's good to enlist some help when working on a project like this. You can also apply the glue to the wood instead of the roadbed. Places where turnouts will go require some cutting. Notice that I've put the two outside pieces in this area first, which follow the pencil lines and define the shape of the turnout. There are a few ways I've seen suggested to do this. I'm going to use the one that seems to work best for me. First, I'll lay out a strip of roadbed and cut it to length. Then I'll cut a wedge-shaped piece off the end so that it fits between the two outer pieces. Next, I'll trim the sloped edge off since I want this piece to meet up with the next one cleanly. Now I have a piece of roadbed that looks like this. I'll glue it down. Once it's dried, I can cut the next piece. Most of the time when I do this, I end up with small gaps under the turnout locations. As long as they're not too big, they shouldn't cause any problems. At this point, it's mostly a matter of repetition to get the rest of the roadbed down. I'm cutting the roadbed at places where the track will cross over a bridge. The bridges won't have cork under the track. Because I want to preserve my pencil-drawn track centers as much as possible, I'm trying to put down the roadbed in an order that will do that. The curving spur track that goes to both wharf areas is an example. The inside of the curve has no other tracks coming off it, so it can be put down in a single piece. When pinning down curves, it's sometimes useful to remember that the cork will try to form a more or less uniform radius on its own when held at the ends. I try to stagger the seams when joining pieces of roadbed end to end so that both sides don't have a gap in the exact same spot. I think that makes for a smoother track base. In congested areas like the yard, I have to think carefully about how I place the roadbed strips so that I can still see the track center lines clearly. I like to make sure that the area is clean before gluing down the roadbed. I don't want anything underneath that might create lumps and make the track uneven. Now I've gotten to the point where I'm filling in what's left with smaller pieces of roadbed. While waiting for the glue to dry in one area, sometimes I'll jump to another and put a piece down there. Any areas that have larger gaps can be filled with small pieces of cork. My goal is to put all the roadbed down before I start laying track. I think that makes sense for a small layout like this, though on a large layout I'd probably work more incrementally. I'd put down some roadbed, then some track, then move to the next area and start again. The yard has several turnouts very close to one another. In spots, I'm trimming the sloping side of the roadbed off so that the next piece of cork will fit more easily. The spacing between the narrow gauge storage track and the freight house track is slightly too close to fit two pieces of roadbed side by side. I'll cut the sloping edge off to make room. Should I call this the golden roadbed ceremony? This is the last piece, which happens to be one of the narrow gauge shop tracks. The entire process took me about 4 days, working a little at a time and walking away and doing something else while waiting for the glue to dry. The next step is to give the roadbed a light sanding. I'm using some 80 grit sandpaper with a sanding block to make sure that I don't put any depressions into the roadbed. Sanding the top will help to even out any high spots. I'm also sanding the sides since some of the cork halves didn't separate cleanly. I want to make sure that all the outer edges have a sloping profile. Finally, I'll vacuum the layout to get rid of dust and bits of leftover cork. This is a good time to check to see if any areas need more sanding. Now that the roadbed is down, I can use some equipment to see if the capacities of the spur tracks are still similar to the original plan. This is looking pretty good so far. It looks like a short train should be able to be staged in the tunnel area too. The layout is ready for track, and that's a good place to leave things for now. I'm happy with the way the layout is coming along so far. In the next episode, I'm going to install some preliminary wiring and add some electronic components that I want to have in place before I start laying track. Stay tuned and thanks for watching.